know why I'm a writer? That's why I'm a writer. I'm a writer because my parents read those great story poems to me when I was a kid. Basically, I'm a writer because of my parents. You know, the truth is, I'd be a Freudian analyst dream because I blame everything on my parents. But I'm a writer because my parents read to me when I was a kid, right from the very beginning. So I grew up with a profound sense of the power of language, an appreciation for the rhythm that's possible when you tell a story. If my parents had only read those poems to me, I probably would have grown up to be a poet. Unfortunately, they read stories to me too. And when I think back about that time when I was a kid and the stories that I got read, I realized there was one story that was particularly important to my own development as a writer. It's kind of an odd story, but I think when I explain it to you, you'll understand. Back in the 1940s, my publisher, Simon & Schuster, began putting out a line of books meant for very young readers. They were called Little Golden Books. Anybody here remember the Little Golden Books? Well, even you guys do too. All right, all right. There was one book in that series that was a particular favorite of mine and my brothers and my sister. It was a book called The Happy Family. It was one of those books where the title says it all. It was about this impossibly happy family. There was a mother and a father and a boy and a girl. They had a cat and a dog. They lived in this nice little suburban tract house. They even drove, I swear to God, a station wagon. You know, not much happens actually in the happy family. There's a birthday party in the backyard, and a little while later they go for a beach outing. And about the most exciting thing that occurs in the whole book is some ants try to get at the birthday cake in the backyard. You know, in terms of what we think of as compelling plot, it's about as insipid as you could get. So, why did my brothers and my sister and I clamor for my father to read that book to us night after night? Well, the truth is, if he'd read that book the way it was written, we'd grow tired of it pretty quickly. But my father never did that. He would read the first few lines as they were printed on the page, and then he would take off, and God alone knew where we'd end up. For example, those ants that try to get at the birthday cake in the book, in my father's telling of that story, those weren't just regular ants. Those were giant ants. And they weren't just after the birthday cake, they were after the happy family. And those waves, when they go to the beach outing, that lap gently against the shoreline. In my father's telling of that story, those were tidal waves, and they swept up the happy family, and the happy family had to fight for their lives. And the part of the story I always liked best was the ending. The ending, as it actually is printed in the book, goes something like this. And Father turned out the light and said, "Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite." My father never ended the story that way. And his telling would end something like this. Father turned out the lights and said, "Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite." But when he came to wake the children in the morning, the bedbugs had gobbled them all up. So what's the point here? The point is that what I learned from my father's reading of that book, or probably more appropriately his non-reading of that book, was a story once begun can go anywhere. You're limited only by the reach of your own imagination. So, I have always been a reader. I have always loved stories. And I have always wanted to be one of the storytellers. The first story I ever remember writing was a short story in the 3rd grade. It was called The Walking Dictionary. Now, my father was a high school English teacher, and he was always storming around the house, raving something like, "Nobody uses dictionaries enough. Nobody uses dictionaries enough." So in the 3rd grade, I wrote a short story called The Walking Dictionary, which was, in fact, about a dictionary. They didn't think it was being used enough, sprouted legs magically, and toddled off into the world so it could go to the people that needed it. My 3rd grade teacher oohed and awed over that story. My folks oohed and awed over that story. Honest to God, in the 3rd grade, I knew I was going to do it right. So I have always written. It's just that in the first 2 or 3 decades of that effort, I never produced anything I was particularly proud of. I'd love to blame that one on my parents, but the truth is, I blame Ernest Hemingway. And for this reason, father, the high school English teacher, insisted I read the work of Ernest Hemingway. Who knows who Ernest Hemingway is? Okay, some of you do. Nobel Prize winning author. So, I read Hemingway, and I fell madly in love with this guy. I loved his prose, sure, but I fell madly in love with this mythic image of Ernest Hemingway. I mean, here was this guy. He was a drinker, and he was a brawler, and he'd been wounded in the war, and he was a war correspondent, and he hung out with matadors, and he went on safaris in Africa, and he'd been given the Nobel Prize for writing a kind of fiction that nobody had ever written before. When I was 18 years old, I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway. And so I spent the first 2 or 3 decades in my writing life trying to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written it, which was pretty stupid, of course, because Hemingway had already done a pretty good job of that. And the real tragedy of that was that it kept me from discovering the writer I could be. All that changed rather suddenly when I was at the end of my 30s. In the fall of 1987, I applied for a Bush Artist Fellowship. Now, the Bush Foundation in our neck of the woods is a well-known philanthropic organization. They give lots of money to lots of worthy causes, and they have what's called an Artist Fellowship program. And a Bush Artist Fellowship is designed so that it would give you, as an artist, enough money so that you can step away from the need to work a job for a year or even a year and a half and do nothing but focus on your development as a writer or as an artist. Man, when I heard about these things, did I want one of those. So in the fall of 1987, I applied for a Bush Artist Fellowship. Now, the fellowship finalists weren't going to be announced until March. And all of those months between fall and March, I went through a lot of dark periods of doubt. I was always telling myself, what a stupid idea. I'm married to a wonderful woman. She's always been supportive of me. And during this whole period of time, she was propping me up with encouragement, telling me how much she believed in me. And all along, she said the unthinkable. She said, you should quit and write no matter what happens. So there I am, a few weeks before the fellowship announcement is made. I'm riding the bus to work one morning, not wanting to go to work at all. And I heard Diane's voice coming to me with great clarity. Well, it wasn't her voice, not crazy, but it was certainly her advice coming to me with great clarity. If you want to write, then write. I pretty much gave notice at my job that same day. And when I went home and told Diane my decision, this wonderful woman, this woman has been such a friend to me my whole life, told me how happy she was and how much she believed. I got the fellowship. Woo! And in the summer of 1988, I stepped away from the workaday world, become a writer with a capital W. But right from the get-go, there was another problem. Because what I tried to do, once again, was write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have written. And the deeper I got into that project, the less I understood it, and the less I understood it, the less I believed in it. But at the end of that fellowship period, I did in fact have a completed manuscript. I had the manuscript for a novel called The Demon Hunter. It was the story of the ultimate battle between good and evil, fought, I kid you not, in the cornfields of Nebraska. Yeah, it was about as ridiculous as it sounds. When I had the manuscript finished, I sent it to a New York agent, a woman who had indicated an interest in me when I got the Bush Artist Fellowship. And she sent me back a letter in response, after she'd read it, saying that it was probably the worst piece of fiction she had ever read. Or at least that's how I interpreted her letter. I was devastated. I'd failed. It was a failure. I failed the Bush Foundation, who'd given me all of this time and all of this money, and all I'd done was produce a piece of dreck. I failed Diane, who had been willing to put our economic well-being on the line so that I could pursue my dream. And of course, I failed myself. because it seemed like with everything I'd been given, all I'd done was somehow prove that I didn't have the right stuff. For 2 years, I didn't write a word. And then something happened that in retrospect I realized was really a good thing. I went through a midlife crisis. I woke up one morning and I realized my life was just galloping away from me. And I had nothing to show for all of those years already lost. But I thought, if I knuckled down again and tried one more time, maybe this time I could produce something I'd be proud of. Now, I'd already tried to write the great American novel, so I knew I wasn't going to do that. I decided I was going to try to write something readers might actually want to read. So I looked around to see what readers were reading. And you know what I saw? People were reading mysteries. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write a mystery. Well, now, here's a confession coming from a guy who writes mysteries. Before I began to write them, I didn't read mysteries. My father, the high school English teacher, did his best to raise his children on literature with a capital L. I didn't even read the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew growing up. And like a lot of people who don't read mysteries, I came to the genre with lots of ill-conceived notions about mysteries. I believe, for example, that mysteries were formulaic. I mean, they all played out the same way, didn't they? I think I even believe there was, like this template that your publisher would send you and you had to write to. Now, anybody who reads mysteries knows that's a bunch of bunk. There is no formula to mysteries, but there is a structure. And when I discovered that structure, I discovered I liked that. The structure of a mystery is very simple. It goes something like this. Mysteries begin with something happening. Usually it's a crime. Very often it's a murder. Investigation follows, and answers are found. That's it. Something happens. Investigation follows, and answers are found. Very simple, but very sturdy, and what's most important, very flexible. Within that structure, a writer is free to do anything he or she wants to do. You're a funny person, you write a humorous mystery. You're an historian, you write an historical mystery. You like philosophy? Fine, put as much philosophy as you want in, so long as you don't slow the pace of the novel. These days, you can get away with putting vampires and werewolves in your mystery. The point is that the reach of the mystery genre is so broad that it can embrace any interest that a reader or a writer might have. And I love that about this genre. It feels very egalitarian to me. There's a reason we call it popular fiction. Its reach is very broad. Just a quick comment on that term, popular fiction. I hear it used in a pejorative way very often. Oh, he writes popular fiction. I would love someday to meet an author who's proud of writing unpopular fiction. You know what I mean? Okay, so I told you that in a mystery, it begins with something happening. My first mystery, Iron Lake, actually begins with two things happening. A paper boy goes missing in a horrible snowstorm, and a local judge is found with his brains splattered across the wall of his study. And the mystery at the heart of Iron Lake is, what is it that ties these two events together? Now, it took me 4 years to figure that one out, because I'm really not a very bright guy. And 4 years probably sounds like a long time to you folks. But when I look back at that time frame, it just seems to me it flew by. And I think that's because I was learning everything that even today continues to form the foundation for all of my work. I learned, for example, the words of jewels. And if you put them on the page correctly, my God, do they sparkle. I learned that writing every day is the best of disciplines. And if circumstances take you away from it for a while, you ought to miss it as you would a lover. Otherwise, you're in the wrong business. I learned that if you don't understand what it is that motivates ordinary people to do the mundane chores of their lives day in and day out, you'll probably never be able to write believably about those extraordinary moments when ordinary people either rise to great action or they stoop to the darkest deeds you can imagine. I learned that every writer needs a good editorial eye. I don't care if Stephen King is a best-selling author. That doesn't mean many of his novels couldn't be shorter and better. I'm going to tell him that the next time I see him. And finally, I learned this. mystery writer is going to sound a little bit like heresy. People, when they talk about mysteries, they think it's all about plot. Oh, that was a great plot. I didn't see that coming. Oh. You know, plot's important, sure. But it's not plot that's going to make a mystery novel or any other novel great. It's all those narrative elements that surround and support the plot. I'm talking about character development. I'm talking about setting. I'm talking about tone, about voice, about themes. These are the things that make a book great. I have young guys in the business come up to me, running up to me, and they go, "Oh, Ken, I got a great plot for a novel." And my response is, big deal. You know, if you haven't got the narrative elements in place to support that plot, you're going nowhere. Now, maybe there's somebody out there going, "Well, Mr. Kruger, what about the Da Vinci Code?" Okay, let's talk for a moment about the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code is one of the most relentlessly plot-driven novels that I've read in a long time. It's good, but it's all plot. And it also just happens to be the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time. The best-selling piece of American fiction of all time. Now, can anyone here tell me what the Da Vinci Code replaced as the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time? What was the best-selling piece of American fiction prior to the Da Vinci Code? Anybody have a guess? Yeah. Gone with the Wind is usually the first guess I get. That's really a great guess, but it's wrong. What else? Well, there are people who believe the Bible is not fiction, nor was it American. What else? Any other guesses? Any other guesses here?
I know.
Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye. That would be one that I'd throw out. No, that's not it. To Kill a Mockingbird.
I know.
To Kill a Mockingbird? Not it. Yeah, my wife knows. You want to know, along with my wife, what the best-selling piece of American fiction of all time prior to the Da Vinci Code was? It was a novel called The Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann.
Oh, that's sad.
Who would have guessed, right? You guys don't even know that book, do you? No. It was a phenomenon of the time. Nobody reads The Valley of the Dolls now, and I think 15 years from now, nobody's going to be reading the Da Vinci Code. It's a phenomenon of this particular time. But people are still going to be reading Gone with the Wind, and they'll be reading To Kill a Mockingbird and Catcher in the Rye, because these books don't depend on plot for their greatness. It's all of those beautiful narrative elements and their themes that make those books great. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. No, wait a minute. I want to get back up for just a minute. Because that's one of the things that I like about writing mysteries. You know, I can stand up on a soapbox. I've discovered that I can couch my own views on social issues in the context of a compelling mystery, and even people who don't necessarily agree with my point of view will still read me. You know, I get occasionally an email from somebody complaining that my admittedly liberal bleeding heart sensibilities have found their way into my stories, but nobody's ever told me they're not going to read me because of it. And honestly, how often is it that you get a chance to stand up on a soapbox and spout off without giving the other side a chance for rebuttal? I love that about what I do. Important things. I have written about an important thing very often in the Corcoran Conner novels. If you're familiar with my series, you may be aware that very often in the stories there's an undercurrent that deals very specifically with the spiritual journey. It's something that comes naturally for Corcoran Conner. He's a man with a foot in two different spiritual traditions. His white Catholicism, he's Irish Catholic, and his Ojibwe spirituality. And he's very often trying to figure out where his own individual spiritual path lies. And you know, that's been a concern for me all my life. A few years ago, a story idea came to me that was not a Corcoran Conner's, but it was a story that seemed to promise the possibility of finally a couple of important journeys in my life coming together. My journey as a writer and my spiritual journey. I spent 3 years writing the manuscript for a novel called Ordinary Grace. small town deep in the Minnesota River Valley. It's the story of a Methodist minister whose beloved child is murdered. That's the compelling mystery. But at heart, it's really the story of what that terrible tragedy does to this man's faith, his family, and ultimately the entire fabric of the small town in which he lives. It's the best thing I've ever written. I put my heart into this book. I poured everything I know about storytelling into this book. And I'm going to read you the prologue. It's very short, to Ordinary Grace. Because if I'm hoping that you'll understand my journey as a writer, this is where I am now. And I'd like you to know where that place is. This is how I bring readers into Ordinary Grace. Just a page. I like short prologues. All the dying that summer began with the death of a child, a boy with golden hair and thick glasses, killed on the railroad tracks outside New Bremen, Minnesota, sliced into pieces by 1,000 tons of steel speeding across the prairie towards South Dakota. His name was Bobby Cole. He was a sweet-looking kid, and by that I mean that he had eyes that seemed full of dreaming, and he wore a half-smile as if he was just about to understand something he'd spent an hour trying to explain. I should have known him better, been a better friend. He lived not far from my house, and we were the same age. But he was 2 years behind me in school, and might have been held back even more, except for the kindness of certain teachers. He was a small kid, a simple child. No match at all for the diesel-fed drive of a Union Pacific locomotive. It was a summer in which death and visitation assumed many forms: accident, nature, suicide, murder. You might think I remember that summer as tragic, and I do, but not completely so. My father used to quote the Greek playwright Aeschylus. He who learns will suffer, and even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. In the end, maybe that's what the summer was about. I was no older than Bobby and didn't understand such things then. I've come 4 decades since, but I'm not sure that even now I fully understand. I still spend a lot of time thinking about the events of that summer, about the terrible price of wisdom, the awful grace. All right. You know, because I write fiction, I'm occasionally accused of writing lies. In my case, if that's true, then, well, I blame my parents. Because they encouraged me when I was a kid to write down my lies. As a result of that, I grew up thinking the world is this marvelous construct of imagination. But the older I got, the more I realized that the real world and the world of fiction don't often resemble each other very much. I mean, how often is it in real life that you have a clear beginning, or a clear middle, or a clear ending to anything? And good luck making sense of it all. The world is just chaos. We know that. But I think we're always looking for some structure in our lives. I think we all hunger for meaning. And I think that's where the real importance of story comes into play. Because when we're in a story, we're someplace that, at least for a while, does make sense. In stories, these beliefs that we have, that our outcomes can have a positive effect on the world, is often validated. In stories, the outcomes that we hope for are often realized. In stories, this hunger that we have for meaning is often satisfied. You know, if it's true that I write lies, then I have to say this. At the heart of those lies